everybody, and good afternoon, and most importantly, Shana Tova. I hope everybody has had a wonderful Rosh Hashanah, is gearing up for an inspiring Yom Kippur, and wishing all of you a happy, healthy, and sweet new year. We're excited to be back with all of you and to continue in these conversations. I'm not going to do a formal introduction. Hopefully you've heard this before, but we're just excited to come together as Jewish communal professionals from across the different denominations and different institutions, but all of whom have studied together through the Shalom Hartman Institute, and to use some of that learning as a foundation for talking about some of the key issues that are facing our world, facing our community, and facing us personally. There is live transcripts available, so if that is something that you want, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a button, a box with a CC that says live transcript. You might have to press on the three dots, depending on what size your screen is, to turn on subtitles. And that is happening automatically, so apologies in advance for any poor transliteration. I don't know exactly what it is that is coming up. And yes, all the videos are being recorded and are archived and are available on YouTube, and Autumn could put that link in the chat. But for now, I am going to pass it over to Rabbi Carney Rose, who's going to be facilitating our discussion today. So Carney, you can take it away.
Thank you, Maharat Roy Pickernice. It's nice to see the Chevra, my teachers and colleagues who are here, and of course, all of you who are joining us as well today. I hope you can hear me well. It sound okay? Good. Fantastic. I want to tell you that in retrospect, right, after the fact, we often learn much more about life than when we're living it. Right, as they say, right, life is understood backwards. They live forwards, but understood backwards. And I had the great privilege of being, I think, the first from St. Louis to participate in the Hartman Institute in the Experience for Rabbis that we are all part of. And I want to say that only after the fact did I realize that I was given such great gifts. Of course, it's the gift of the Hartman Institute, the Torah of the Hartman Institute, and the wonderful, amazing teachers that we had. But I have to say that by far the greatest gift that we received was the Chevra, the community that was built. Yes, initially it was with my cohort, but then over the course of time with other cohorts and with other individuals, and now this new cohort that we have created here in St. Louis. And I have to say that as much as I loved all of these individuals before, my love for them and respect for them has grown over the course of these conversations. Ken Yirbu, may we have many more opportunities to gather and teach, and may our group expand. I hope there'll be others who will attend the Shalom Hartman Institute and bring their Torah to us. And when I say their Torah, the Torah of the Hartman Institute, which is ever evolving, and the Torah of the individuals who are helping evolve Torah in the various communities in which we find themselves. One of the ideas I was going to share with my colleagues is maybe from time to time we can invite some other of our colleagues from our cohorts to join us, and maybe it would be a gang of 5 instead of this group of 4, but an interesting concept and idea so we can hear Torah from other places. But here's this crazy idea that I had. You know, as much as I've gotten to know the colleagues in a wide variety of ways through communal work, through our own interactions with one another, I never really understood what's at the heart of their Torah. What really inspires them? What moves them? What makes them who they are today? Why do they do the work that they are doing in our community and in the world? And so I thought, wouldn't it be neat to have a session where each of us had an opportunity to share a text that serves as kind of a guiding light, guiding principles. In fact, when we were at the Hartman Institute, my cohort, it was a time when Hartman was talking about ikarim, essential elements that were consequential and significant to all those who are interested in accessing the wisdom of Jewish tradition. And so maybe we can call today Ikarim. These are our principles, foundational texts and teachings that spur on the important and holy sacred work that we are each doing. And so this afternoon, we're going to have some opportunity for each of us to share a text and teach the text. And of course, more important than the text itself is the context that each teacher is going to provide for each of us. So for each of the texts and for each of us who are participating as well. So with that being said, we're going to begin with Rabbi Bennett. And you'll notice that we're going to try to go chronologically, and I don't mean that in terms of age. I mean, Beats the alternative, Rabbi. I mean it in terms of the text that you have chosen. And Rabbi Bennett, bevakasha, an honor to have you teach us some Torah.
Thanks, Rabbi, and Shana Tova to everyone. I want to echo what our Rabbi Rose has said to us today about the chevra, the friendship and the connection that we have not only with one another, but with all of our fellow students and with all of you who are joining us virtually. Even though we don't see you, we know you're there because you tell us, and it means a great deal to us to know that you're there. And I'm not ashamed to be the first to share my ikar, nor to be even unintentionally hinted at as the oldest. Because the text I'm going to bring is the oldest of the texts that we're going to look at. And Rabbi Rose wisely organized our presentation today based upon how long these texts have been in the public domain. And the text I want to share is both for me personally, perhaps one of the oldest texts in my lexicon of Jewish understanding and values, but also is among, it's not the oldest text that we have as Jews, not by far, but it is an ancient text. And it's a text that comes to us from Tanakh, from the Bible. I want to say by way of introduction before I share this text that as a young child, and when asked by Rabbi Rose to think about the text that is most central, I was returned to my childhood when from the earliest time I can remember, my mother and father used to invite my siblings and I to pause at bedtime and to recite the words of Shema Yisrael. And that became a family tradition in accordance with the tradition of our people, and continued throughout my childhood, into my adulthood, and into the life of my own children as I raised them, and continues to be something that I personally take very seriously and invite all of us to consider as well. And my first thought when asked to bring an ikar was to bring the words of Shema Yisrael. And then I remembered that although that was the first text I ever learned as a Jew that I can remember, that I'm aware of having ever learned, and it became so automatic in my life, reciting the words of Shema Yisrael every single day of my life, it ceased in some way to actually be the most ikar-like, the most central, the most critical text of my life. And it was replaced by coincidence, or perhaps not, by another text that I inherited, I guess I'll say, when I turned 13, half a century ago. This summer was my 50th anniversary of turning 13. You can do the math. And in the summer of 1971, I was called to the Torah as a bar mitzvah, July 10th, 1971. And by the coincidence of the calendar on my birthday, which was a few days later, I was assigned Parshat Balak from the book of Numbers. And the Haftarah that I was assigned is the text I want to share with all of you today. The Haftarah that goes, and those of you who are familiar with the cyclical reading of Torah and the Haftarah portions that go with them probably already know what this text is, and I hope that all of us know it, or at least have heard it. But for me, it became by necessity, because I had to give a drash on it as a 13-year-old. A drash, by the way, which I contemplated giving today and thought I'd spare you all because it was such drivel, written by a 12-and-a-half-year-old who said, I don't even know what I said, but I still have it. And, you know, in a moment of weakness, I might share it, but not today. But I want to share the ikar, the essential text that the prophet Micah shared. And so I'm going to share it, and then we'll look quickly together at two rabbinic commentaries on this text. And then I'd love to hear the reactions of my colleagues to this text, which has become for me, without doubt, without hesitation, sort of the core, the heart of my own faith and my commitment as a Jew. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll just look at this text together from the prophet Micah, chapter 6, verse 8. he begins by asking a question and making a statement. He says, "Higid lecha adam ma tov," what it has been told you, O human being, what is good. In the literal Hebrew, of course, the text says, it has been told you, O man, what is good. And in another conversation, we could talk about who these words are addressed to, but I choose to translate this text as God saying to all of us, human beings, this is what the good is and what God requires of you. Only that you do justice and love chesed, love goodness or kindness or mercy in different translations, and only that you walk in humility or modestly with your God. This famous text is so central to my personal faith and belief about what it is I believe that the divine asks of me as a human being and what I believe is required of me as a human being. And it is summed up by these three core principles of tzedek, justice, or mishpat in the literal words of the prophet, chesed, kindness, goodness, love, mercy, all of those things, and humility in the presence of God. So I want to quickly look at two other texts that explicate this in the rabbinic mind, and then I'd love to just have a conversation about what this text says to you and how you react. So in the Babylonian Talmud, we read in Tractate Sukkah 49b, and this is what Rabbi Elazar said about this text from Micah. What is the meaning of that which is written? It has been told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. In classic rabbinic fashion, the rabbis read the text, which, by the way, seems so self-evident, and they say, yeah, maybe, but what is this really teaching us? What is this really about? And Rabbi Elazar says quite directly, to do justly, well, this is justice. We all know what that means. To love mercy, this is kindness. We know what that means. And then he surprisingly says, but to walk humbly with God, to walk in humility or modestly with God, this, he says, is referring to taking our indigent dead out for burial and accompanying a poor bride to her wedding canopy, both of which, he points out, are acts that must be performed without any fanfare. They're sort of thankless jobs. Nobody wants to do them, but we have to. And then he goes on, we go on in the Gemara, and it continues. And are these matters that we don't already know, that we don't already infer a fortiori? Aren't they self-evident? With regard to matters that tend to be conducted in public, as multitudes participate in funerals and weddings, the Torah says, walk humbly. If we already know that we're supposed to do these things with humility in public, then in matters that tend to be conducted in private, things that nobody's going to see, like giving charity or learning or studying Torah, all the more should they be conducted privately, i.e. with humility. I'll pause there for a moment for that to sink in, and then I'll conclude and we'll stop sharing and talk with one another with another text from the Talmud, because later in a different tractate, Makot 24a, this very simple statement appears. Micah came and established 613 mitzvot upon 3. As it is written, it has been told you, O human, what is good and what Adonai requires of you, only to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. In other words, here, the Talmud is teaching us that Micah isn't just teaching something very specific about humility in our most thankless acts, the things that we do without getting any credit for them, without getting any reward for them. But the Talmud now is saying there are really only 3 mitzvot. There are not 613 mitzvot, the Talmud suggests. They all can be summarized in these 3: justice, love, and humility in the presence of God. It makes for a very different Judaism. It makes for a very different religion. And I want to stop sharing there and just come back together and ask my colleagues to react to the texts that for me have become operational I hope in my life, and critical in the way I teach and live Judaism. So I'll pause there and ask for reactions.
Yashar koach. Beautiful, Rabbi. Before we do that, could we just each introduce ourselves? We were asked in the chat to introduce what we do and where we're from, because we have some new folks who haven't been with us before. So Rabbi Bennett, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Thank you. I was so intent on talking that I wasn't paying attention to the chat. Yeah. I'm Rabbi Jim Bennett. I'm one of the rabbis of Congregation Sheremet here in St. Louis, and a great honored part of this chevra of my fellow rabbis who've all studied at the Hartman Institute.
Rabbi Bogard, introduce, please.
Daniel Bogard, and I'm at Central Reform Congregation, one of the rabbis there, and was with Jim in Jerusalem for 4 summers in the same Hartman cohort.
Wonderful. And Maharat?
Hi, I'm Rory Picker-Nice. I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council in St. Louis. I used to be part of the clergy team at Base Abraham Congregation, and I am still part of a Hartman cohort, which means that these other folks like to remind me that I am not a senior scholar, just a junior in process.
Don't rush it. Don't rush it. Being senior isn't such a big deal. I'm Carney Rose. I'm one of the rabbis at Congregation B'nai Yamuna in Creve Coeur, and I am Rabbi Bennett's direct next door neighbor, and he has a much nicer yard than I do. With that being said, reactions to the text from Micha and the beautiful Gemarot that the rabbi shared, along with his Fataych, right? His unique, I think, reading of the particular text. So, who would like to go first? Maharat, Rabbi Daniel, please, bevakasha.
I'll jump in. I have a question, Jim. I really like that final text you brought that talked about these as being lenses to interpret the 613 mitzvot through. I'm wondering, is that a core lens for you? I mean, do you sort of filter mitzvot in a very reform way, I guess, through those and reinterpret them, reimagine them, renew them through those?
Thank you for asking. I mean, I actually would be even more direct than you. You were being very kind in the way you said that. I'll be very honest and public about this. I think the mitzvot, the 613 mitzvot, and all the interpretations of them, the rituals and the practices of Judaism are beautiful, and they enrich our lives in countless ways. And I incorporate many of them into my life as a Jew. I observe Shabbat in many different ways, and festivals and holidays. On the other hand, I don't, as a Reform rabbi and as a Reform Jew, personally believe that the essential core of Judaism is the observance of specific mitzvot, i.e. ritual mitzvot. I don't believe that the quality of one's Jewishness can be measured by how observant or unobservant one is or is not. These 3 mitzvot, however, and the reason I love this last text so much is because these 3 mitzvot seem to me to say what classical Reform rabbis did say in the platforms of early Reform Judaism. They said the only mitzvot that really get our attention, that really compel us as Reform Jews, the essence, as it were, of what it means to be a Jew is not defined by ritual practice, but by the core ethical obligations. And they are, as Micah has summarized them, and I think we could argue about should there be others on the list, or are there some missing, etc. But, justice, kindness, and humility, that's a pretty great list. And I would be really satisfied if we could get all the Jewish community just focusing on doing those 3 things, and everybody else too, by the way. I don't think these are unique to Jews. So I hope that answers your question.
I appreciate the text so much, and I also appreciate Daniel's question, right? Because I think this is we get to learn more about each other through these texts, both in terms of how we choose the text and how we choose to interpret it, because I couldn't help, right, as you were teaching the text, like what was immediately going through my mind, Jim, was like, that's not the full Gemara. Right? Like that's sort of like where I go, which maybe also just tells you like a little bit more about me, right? Because it's the rabbis debating all of this. And Micah is one of the things that they offer, but they offer kind of multiple, ways of kind of putting the Torah succinctly. And I think, that's part of, as I think about all of these things, I always find it interesting because other people, I don't know if all of you have this sometimes, right? But I find like other people, they'll sometimes ask me like to do a Dvar Torah or to give like a Jewish lens on, fill in the topic. And actually, I think it was one of the times that I was in Jerusalem with Hartman, they played this game. It was like Shabbat dinner, and they passed around two bowls. And I can't even remember, like one bowl had like a topic, and the other bowl had like a Torah portion, and that was like our game, was like, what's your Devar Torah, right? So like you randomly, but that's like, but this is what we do, right? This is what we all do. And it was like a joke because we all can do it. But I think about that to say, at the end of the day, like I'm not easily compelled by texts because we can all make texts say what we want to say, right? But I say that to say I'm more compelled by your teaching from the text, right? It's not that literally this text appears, because I can give you just as much of a textual basis for why we need to be closed off, or why we need to be focused exclusively on only helping ourselves, right? I can give you the text, but in this, right, of what I'm hearing you say is this universal vision of the world of who would we, exactly what you just said, right? Who would we be as a world if this was actually our driving force? And how do we live in a world where those are the questions that if we ask ourselves, how does my life live up to this? And so I'm just reflecting back, because it's not that I think this is the only explanation of the Torah. I think it's that this is your Torah, right? Like this is the way that you are going through the world, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful in its openness, but I think certainly to what Daniel was also kind of pushing, right? Like there's like a deep theological interpretation of Judaism that emerges through this text.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, Rory, so much for being really clear. I want to be provocative, but I would absolutely not want to be offensive. I have great admiration and respect for those other voices, both in Gemara, which I didn't choose to bring. I didn't bring the whole long debate about what is the most important mitzvah, because on the one hand, that Gemara goes even more to what I'm saying. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the whole Torah. Do not do unto another what you would not want him to do to you. That's the whole Torah. But I could also go the other direction and say observance of any given mitzvah. The ritual sacrifices, should the temple be rebuilt in our day, speedily, amen, or kashrut or daily prayer. My point is not to be offensive to anybody who finds deep meaning in any of those mitzvot. I think those are beautiful, and I choose to observe many of them myself. But when one is asked about ikar, what is the essence, the most important, the most critical, and to me, the most operative in terms of making the world better, this reading of Torah, this reading of why we're here compels me, and has become for me increasingly throughout my life the driving force of who I am and what I teach and what I don't teach. I could say more about that, but I'm going to stop.
That's great. I want to add in the emphasis, and I think you started to say it, Rabbi Bennett, but I think in part the time limited you, but the notion of the word only here, right? This word only, lemiute, right? Like we're kind of minimizing what's happening here in this conversation. But for God's sakes, if we only did these things as a starting place, what would our world look like? And I'm so glad that you mentioned it, beyond just the Jewish world, the world at large. If we could all just practice these elements, I want to start there. But I also want to share and challenge a little bit with the notion of, and this concept of ikarim was really, my thing. Like, what is your ikar? So I kind of put you in the box, and now I'm going to kind of throw a couple of daggers in the direction of the box. But I'm also going to say the following, that I hope and pray, and I think I've already heard it from you, so I think I know it already, that this is just a starting place, right? You round out your religious spiritual life in a wide variety of ways. Many of those would be mitzvot, right? Or what we call classically mitzvot, that are mitzvot ma'asiyot, things that you actually do, things that you practice, right? They're not just a matter of theory. And I want to make sure that, because essentializing has an element of danger to it. Ikarim have an element of danger to them. We could say this is the sum total of everything. I didn't hear you saying that. And what I hear you saying is this is a great starting place that motivates me, that says to me, now I've got to go out and do the work in the world, or learn more, or experience more, or become better, or more sensitive, or more aware. All the things that I think come from this kind of attitudinal orientation to the world. So I'm very moved by it. And maybe at some point we could have a conversation about in our lifetimes, this was maybe the starting place, and it's continued to be the starting place for you. But what has changed, right? And maybe that's something we can talk about down the road. What has changed for you because of this orientation? Right? How has it made you the person that you are today? And I think you started that conversation, but I'd love to hear, like that was volume 1, what happened in episode 2 and 3 and 4, and some of the places that we've all gone on this derech, on this pathway that we've lived, and how we've evolved based on the ikar doesn't change, but how we practice the ikar seems to change with time. So just some observations, but I really appreciate it. I was very moved by the passion with which you shared it as well, which isn't surprising. Rabbi Boger, did you want to add anything else? No, fantastic.
No. Thank you, Jim.
Wonderful. Rabbi Bennett, that was outstanding. Now we have to live up to that. That's a great challenge. So Rabbi Bogart, since you're muted, we're going to ask you to unmute. And if you wouldn't mind, you'll share your text and we'll talk about your ikar. But once again, thank you, Rabbi Bennett, for starting us off so beautifully.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. This is coming through to everyone. You see these? I actually just taught these texts. I'm teaching at Eden Seminary this semester, a class I'm calling Jewish Texts on Jewish Terms. So taught this to a bunch of Christian seminarians. So it's on my tongue here. I want to start with really the very first Jewish text in some ways, right? Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 12. Everything up to this point, the first 11 chapters of the Torah is really the story of the world, and everything after this in the Tanakh is the story of the Jewish people. So this is that first moment, right? Now Hashem said to Avram, go forth from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the